Now, in December of 1987, this is where the landscape changes a bit, because Luke Skywalker, Pac Jam, ghetto-style DJs had always had a rival in Candyman, Norberto Morales, his base station club, his base station label, and his Triple M DJ crew, and Eric Griffin as a producer. But in December of '87, Candyman was murdered. And this effectively ended the feud, put Luke Skywalker and his crew and his label on a new plateau with no competition directly. It's now a landscape of imitators and a few innovators nipping at his heels. It was his time. And their sophomore record, and when I say they, I mean Two Live Crew, which back then was prominently billed as Luke Skywalker, Two Live Crew. Their sophomore album came out beginning in 1988. The album initially was being built on the 808, just as all the albums were, but the SB1200 was released, and on that album, 3 of those songs were built on the SB1200, and then they released this album in a new direction with a different competition involved. What no one could have foretold is the gimmicks themselves of all the X-rated antics actually became serious. One record store clerk was jailed for selling pornography once this album was sold. So suddenly, people are paying attention to Miami bass, and as they say, there is no such thing as bad press. And at this point, it seemed clear that this was going to be the new gimmick to market something that had limited funds behind it. Now, having limited funds really changes everything. Or I should say is affected by the change. Because in 1988, Yo MTV Raps goes on the air. This was a pet project of Fab Five Freddy's, and massive, massive success. And for those who had never had to fund videos before, well, it was time to consider, do you as a record label want to spend $30,000 on something that's a regional success to try to get it into rotation at UMTV Raps? But at the same time, there was a local outlet that sprouted up called Video Jukebox. Now, Video Jukebox was probably more apt to play local videos, bartering system and so forth. Joy Boy Records had a great relationship with Video Jukebox, bartering one of their groups, Miami Boys, as spokespeople and ambassadors for Video Jukebox. Later down the road, Video Jukebox became known as The Box. They simply shortened it, and this became a very innovative way of showing videos, where you call up and actually pay money to see a video that's on their roster. So it's it's viewer controlled. It's far more democratic than UMTV Raps. And shortly after this, BET put out Rap City, their version of UMTV Raps. So now there are 3 video outlets on the market. So Miami bass, as a whole, had to react. And Joy Boy, of course, being in good with Video Jukebox, was willing to fund $30,000 here and there for videos. And it went a long way for them to propel a few of their groups. Luke also did the same. Luke Skywalker Records did videos for Lawan Love, for Two Live Crew, of course, and a few others down the road, and even Pandisc Records, Bo Crane's Pandisc Records, began funding videos. But what about the other labels? If you can't afford $30,000, now you're left out. And that was just to get them produced. Getting them played, whole nother topic. Now, DXJ has been a prominent figure throughout the history of Miami bass, pretty much from day one, still up until today. Recently released 12-inch on Debonair Records. Claudio Barella restarted his label, so he's been there from day one and still is there today. But DXJ has gone from working with small labels and small financiers to trying to do independent. But in 1987-88, he signs a deal with Pandisc Records, with Bo Crane's Pandisc Records, who's really been struggling. Bo Crane was, of course, the DJ for Hunting for the Bears during the disco days. He was a record promoter. He was fairly tied into the industry at a mid-range level for being an independent. And DXJ felt that he could no longer push independently. Upon doing this, everything changes. because for DXJ, he was offered a pretty good deal. You can use as many names as you want. You can battle with yourself. You can pull in other records in our catalog that you want and add them to your album. And the first project they did was known as The Bass That Ate Miami. The actual title song was an old Blowfly track that they removed the vocals from, and DXJ got to put his touches on it. There's another old Blowfly track that he had also tinkered with a few years earlier. Electronic Pussy Sucker and Fuck the Devil were the two Blowfly novelty songs that he reworked into The Bass That Ate Miami, and also a song called Street Wars by Palmer Force. That was a few years earlier, but it was sucked into this project, and this project sold. The irony, no SB1200 on it whatsoever during an age when SB1200 completely reshaped of all of hip-hop. Seattle is a place that most people think of as the polar opposite to Miami, which I guess nationally speaking that's true. But Seattle technically still is West Coast, and the West Coast electro scene has always been tied to the Miami bass scene, Miami electro scene, largely through the distribution network that Macola Records was tied into on the West Coast. So the idea of electro bass and ultimately bass music was something that's always been as much West Coast as much as it is South Florida. So being that in 1987-88, Sir Mix-a-Lot breaks through with an album called Swass, and the car audio market swoops it up and becomes a big fan of it all, it shouldn't be that surprising, as a West Coast act always steeped in it. He had been working the scene since 1986, even a couple years earlier on some smaller releases, so it's not too surprising.